President Biden is nominating Fargo attorney Max Schneider to serve as U.S. Attorney for North Dakota. Schneider is 43 years old, has law offices in Fargo and Grand Forks, and is a former state senator. He's an alumnus of UND and Georgetown University Law School. The judge in the Mar-a-Lago case is appointing Judge Raymond J. Dearie as special master to review documents seized by the FBI at former President Trump's Florida home. Dearie was proposed by Trump and is the only special master candidate out of 4 that both sides found agreeable. In the same order, she denied the Justice Department access to the roughly 100 classified documents for use in its criminal investigation. The DOJ asked for those documents seized from Mar-a-Lago in August for use, again, in their ongoing criminal investigation. Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison is gearing up for one of the most closely watched races in the state happening this year. Challenging his re-election bid is Republican Jim Schultz, who's focusing his campaign on crime within the state. Esme Murphy has a look at that close race.
Keith Ellison's 4 years as Attorney General includes the successful prosecution of former police officers Derek Chauvin and Kim Potter, winning lawsuits against Big Pharma and fiercely defending abortion rights.
It's a significant issue in the lives of women.
Ellison cites a woman carrying an unviable fetus.
People like Jim Schultz want to tell her what to do. They want to be in the middle of her family decision-making process.
Republican Jim Schultz, who was a hedge fund attorney and is anti-abortion rights, says abortion should not be a campaign issue. The focus, he says, needs to be on rising crime.
We see on Minneapolis streets, on streets in greater Minnesota and elsewhere, extraordinary crime, an unprecedented increase in our state's history.
Put that on Keith Ellison.
100%, 100%. We have in Keith Ellison,
He's to blame.
The chief law enforcement officer of our state, who backed defunding the police.
Ellison insists he never backed defunding the police. He did, though, support the failed Minneapolis Charter Amendment, which would have replaced police with a Department of Public Safety.
I don't feel it's the same at all. I've been working on guns. Folks who talk about public safety, my question is, where do you stand on background checks?
Schultz opposes gun control measures, which earned him an A. That was a rating with the Minneapolis Gun Owners Caucus. That same polling gave Ellison an F. Just out in the valley today, a Ring doorbell catches disaster as mudslides wipe out a family's front yard in California. Also coming up, a North Dakota woman born on the same day as Queen Elizabeth ends up a lifetime pen pal with none other than Her Majesty.